Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Doris Mangrum, your host, and this is Stop the Madness, Practical Ways to Influence the Incarceration Crisis. For those of you that have been watching the show, you know that we're in a series of sorts. This is a program of education in our community, and Stop the Madness is a series of that program. But Stop the Madness has also been in a series that we're calling Check the Reality. And so we talked last time about leadership and checking the reality around leadership. Well, today we're going to be looking at victim blaming versus system blaming. And we're calling it to blame or not to blame. And as you also know, if you've been watching the show, one of my co-contributors and who's often guest on the show is Lora, Sall, who is a community outreach specialist who's worked on the inside, with people who are incarcerated, worked on the outside, with people who were formerly incarcerated in the community and law enforcement. So she has a wealth of information, hands-on, regarding, you know, what the systems look like and what the victim blaming looks like. So again, welcome, Lora.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. With our show, you know that we talk about things that are around incarceration. And today we're going to go a little bit broader in that when we look at victim blaming versus system blaming. And just so that everyone's clear on what we're going to be looking at today, you know, as it pertains to social problems, we typically will say, well, you know, it's the problem of the system. If this wasn't the case, this would be the case. But then there are those who say, well, no, it's the problem of the people who are in the situation. If they got their act together, then things would be better. Well, the reality is that this is probably a very tricky topic for us to be broaching today, because it depends on what the situation is, where you are in the situation, whether you're going to lean towards system blaming versus victim blaming. An example of that, let's say if you're looking at someone in school, you know, it's easy to say the child who is not going to school is the problem. The reason why they're not getting what they need is because they need to do something about what they're doing and making sure they get there. Or we could look at the system and say that the system is not giving the child what they need because the curriculum's not relevant, or the expectation of the child is not there. So Lora, let's begin to look at this topic, knowing that we may come out being right in the middle of the road of it, because the dependency upon where we are will depend on what we're looking at the time. So how do you feel in terms of system blaming versus victim blaming? Where do you stand on it, and what's your thoughts about it just in general?
Well, first of all, I'm old school. I come from an era and a time when we as a people were faced with the system treating us one way and the community treating us another way. But at home, our parents told us, I don't care what's going on out there, you have to do things a certain way.
Standards, yes.
We got standards in this household, and you have to do things, and I expect you to be better than whatever's going on out there. Whatever's happening out in the streets, that's going to be out there. The system is going to treat you that way regardless of who you are, and you cannot focus on blaming anyone or anything. You got to get your stuff together and take care of you. And so I grew up with that as my motto, and knowing that when it came to my grandmother and my parents and my aunts and uncles and people, we had to deal with things a certain way. And we were going to march, and we were going to deal with being black in this country, in the communities, in our jobs, in our schools, and they were going to treat us a certain way anyway. So you can't focus on that.
I love that, because that's a reality, isn't it? You know, I think sometimes as I'm listening to your response, it triggered for me, like, you know what, at the end of the day, forget what the system says.
Yeah.
Because we will survive no matter what. Because what tends to happen in victim blaming is we look at a people and we say that their behavior is because of their behavior that they're in this position, without looking at all of the environment that they find themselves, or the disintegrating social systems that they find themselves in.
And the history. The history of those systems, and how a particular group of people were targeted to be treated that way. But that never held us down.
Never held us down.
No, it never stopped us. Now we're at that point in 2016 where we're seeing more and more of our people being impacted by how we've been treated. But historically, it's never held us down. We have continued to go forward, we've continued to learn, we've continued to grow. And I still have hope for our people.
And you said something that just triggered something else, and you said our people are more impacted now by, the system blaming, the system blaming versus the victim blaming. And why do you think that is? Because somewhere along the line, it feels like we've lost something. When I say it seems like we've lost something, as you started out talking about the way it was back in the day, and the expectations of our households, that I don't care what's going on out here, this is what you're going to achieve. This is, and it was embedded in us. It was ingrained in us. This is what you're going to have to do. So if we are now more impacted in 2016, what has that led to? Because we have more, we have more things for us. We have the high technology. We have the ease of doing things. So why are we now more impacted by the system, in your estimation, than we have been in years past, decades past, and so forth?
Well, when I say impacted, I mean when we look at where we are as a people, okay, and I have to focus on African Americans because that's what I am.
Okay.
When we look at where we are as a people, mass incarceration and our children failing in school and dropping out of school, and our households having one-parent households versus two, and our children not really being engaged in what's happening at home. We're seeing and hearing so much about the I can't think of my word, where our families and our communities are going down. Okay. I think a lot of that has to do with the fear of other people towards us, because in spite of what has come our way, in spite of what has been thrown at us, we continue forward. We have continued with everything I just named. It hasn't stopped us. It hasn't gotten rid of us. For some reason, we don't die, we multiply. And we still here, we baby kids. And so, so when I speak of those things, I think of how we have continued to grow and how we continue to survive in spite of what it has been done to us.
What I hear you saying too, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, as we have grown, as we have evolved, if you will, the victim blaming has also evolved. Because you remember, one of the things that comes to mind for me is the man in the house evolved. That man in the house that deals with our TANF, or our public housing, where it's subjective as to who can be in, evolved into felon in the house, former drug person, connected drug felon in the house. So the victim blaming can change by the powers that be who control the system, so that it will work to keep a people down. And the expansion of it has somewhat been really connected to the incarceration crisis, because we put so much on the drug war. And primarily black and brown people have been the ones who have been hardest hit by the drug war. And so that population has mushroomed into a place where our communities of resource deficiency are now in that place where they're just overcrowded, if you will, with people who are coming back home with the felons on their back. So the system has worked to more highly impact the victims because it has evolved and it keeps changing. Because I believe that if we look really closely at the system and the system blaming, it's controlled by a very few people. And when I say very few people, I shouldn't say very few people, a very small percentage of the big population.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why, you know, when you talk about victim blaming and system blaming, I choose to not accept either of those terms.
Okay.
Okay? Just as we have so many people who want to identify folks as victims, okay? And just like with inmates, they want to identify them as criminals or felons and stuff. I tell people regularly, this is where you are. This is not who you are.
Absolutely.
And so you can leave here, leave those jails, and carry yourself like a felon or a criminal. Then that's how people will view you. So we can leave our communities and carry ourselves like victims and have other people view us as victims, as they would be happy to do. Or we can decide, okay, you want to call me a victim, but I'm not a victim. Psychologically, your word or your definition of who I am does not impact how I have to view myself.
So now as I'm listening to you again, you're coming up with so many amazing thoughts for me. The burden, if you will, can, in that particular example that you just cited, be on the person who's coming out and their mindset. But then there will be those who would hear your response and go, but yes, even when I come out with that mindset, there's a system that's waiting for me. That system that says no jobs, no housing, no support because I have this felony on my back. But if I also still listen to what you just said, you got to override all that. You still have to keep pushing because our choices are that we have the choice to keep on pushing and to push beyond even what people say we can. We have to believe that we can do things. We have to risk more. We have to try more. We have to do more in order to get where we want to go. And that's from the very thing that you said at the very beginning. And nothing's really changed. It's just the environment that we now find ourselves in with these choices, if you will.
Well, something has changed. This is 2016.
Okay.
Versus 1865.
Okay.
Okay, but we still black. And so we have been dealing with this all of our lives. Okay, black folks been poor all of their lives.
Yes.
They have had less than most people most of our lives. And so, yes, we can look at the fact that we have a little more stuff in 2016, but we still are the target of certain folks because for some reason we won't go away.
Well, you know, as you are saying that too, and you say that we are people who have in the past been marginalized, black, brown people who have come from situations where they have been, you know, having to come from, raise themselves up. What are your thoughts about, we see it from time to time, at least I've seen it from time to time, I don't know if you've experienced it too, where people who were once a part of, I guess you would say, the victim population, who have now raised themselves up to a place where they could be kind of on the system side, if you will, because now I have arrived, I live on the hills, I make, you know, 6-7 figure salary. I'm no longer in that victim place. So now I no longer can remember what it was like. You know, when we talk about, don't forget where you came from. Is it your belief, or what are your thoughts about when people have come from that victim spot, who have, you know, raised themselves up and then are in a position to do more and appears that they are not? How do we help people to remember that we're all a part of this, to get that sense of community that we once were so strong in, that seems to be, that we seem to be losing some ground on today?
Well, as you were speaking, I couldn't help but think about the people that have removed themselves from the victim spot, but not necessarily transitioned to the system.
Okay.
Totally. And one victim I keep thinking of is the boy called It. Okay, this young man was brutalized and victimized and totally mistreated in his own household. He came from a household of 2 parents, other children in the house, but for some reason he was the target of his parents' madness. And they chained him to the toilet, would feed him feces from the baby's diaper. They wouldn't allow him to go to school and just constantly beat him and mistreated him. But that boy is now a man, a father, a husband, and a motivational speaker, and he goes around talking to people about how not to become a victim. And so he's not so much on the system side as some people would think. He would have been very justifiable to go that way if he chose to. But he's not a victim either. He's somewhere in the middle where he's able to move forward in spite of where he's been.
He's seen both sides.
Exactly.
And recognizes that here's what you can do to come out of this place.
Exactly.
But also recognizing that these are the things that you're going to have to deal with along the way.
And you mentioned a young man that was burned by his father more recently. And nor did he choose to remain the victim. And time again, there are stories about people who have overcome in spite of where they've been. Well, I think that's our history. That's as much of our history as anything on media and others try to identify as our history. Our history of survival and being a people who kept marching forward and staying together and moving on and up in spite of the system and those others that kept trying to keep us the victim. We have that as our history as well, and I choose to focus on that part.
Absolutely. So if you've just tuned in, our topic today is check the reality, to blame or not to blame. And we're checking in on victim blaming versus system blaming. Victim blaming being the reason that we have our social problems is because of these people. System blaming looks at, saying, well, if this was in place and that was in place, there wouldn't be the victims in the first place. So it's one of those places, Lora, and the more we talk about it, the more I see it's the fence straddling. Because if you stand totally on the system blaming side, that would be to say that people just really don't have a choice center, that they just are robots and there is no space for change. And if you say stick strictly on the victim side, on the victim side, the victim will say that, well, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. Well, then you'll then say, well, no, you need to stop woeing is me and get off your duff and try, even in spite of. Don't buy in to the system. So that becomes then this great fence straddling place where, well, it depends, well, you need to do this. And even I, as a motivational speaker, and you as a motivational speaker, what do we say? We do just like with the example that you just brought out. No matter what your circumstances will find you, there is a way out. But the key is what?
How we see ourselves.
Got to believe.
You got to believe. And why blame anyone?
Because that's a waste of time.
Exactly.
It's a waste of time.
Exactly.
I'm sure, we both are of an era that we've seen things in our lives that probably we'd rather not even remember, but are a part of who we are. And so we are, and we have come to where we are in this life in spite of those things. And if we were to think back and really, zero in on it, it was because we didn't let those things define us. We chose not to be victims.
Absolutely.
When we very well could have been. And we go back to slavery. Slavery, by and large, we brought here to be victimized.
Exactly.
And I think from that victimization is why we're such a strong people. From the victimization of the Native Americans whose land was taken from them, they've become a strong people. And you look at time and time and time again of others who have come and been placed in victim positions, but they have risen above that and beyond that in spite of the system that still exist. So where do we find the happy median then between our destiny and making a choice to do, because let's be real, okay, because there will be people who are probably watching today who are saying, I'm in the hood, my mother, I'm only here with my mom, we've got 4 or 5 people in our family, this is how much money we have coming in, they're not fixing the roads, they're not fixing my house, the school is awful, the crime is awful, it's ridiculous, that's a reality. So how do we check that reality? How do we find that place between this that we're looking at and seeing and that place where people are looking at stuff that is wrong and looking at that stuff that is wrong and saying, I'm going to get out of it in spite of all of this? Where does that come from? Where can we as a people come back to coming to that place where I don't care how big the pothole is. And I broke my ankle in one of them. So, that's a side story. But at the end of the day, how do we get out of that place of looking at the stuff that's been piled on top? Because that's the reality. In many cases, in many of our marginalized communities, they're dealing with a whole bunch of stuff. How do we get to that medium, that happy medium which says, get beyond that?
I can't help but remember that's always been our reality. Okay. My parents migrated from the South to the Midwest back in the 50s, and they were 17 and 19, and by 21 they had 3 children. And so I don't recall a time when black folks really had any option but to persevere in spite of, okay? And so what I'm saying is I don't want to focus on the victimization or the system blaming. I don't want to focus on either one of them. I love being who I am, and I love being a black woman in the midst of all of this madness we called America. And I love it so much that I get excited about connecting with folks and being involved with my community and thinking of ways in which my children and grandchildren can continue to grow and persevere in spite of. I mean, we can go on and on. I listen to people talk about some of our current people who are running for office and the foolishness they're saying, and Lord help us if so-and-so wins, and Lord help us if this one wins. Lord help us anyway, in spite of, please, because whoever's going to win, they're going to win and they're going to do what they do, okay? But that doesn't have to stop us from coming together and doing what we need to do as a people and as a community, supporting all people. Okay, I love being black, but that's not at the expense or separate from loving other people, And so it doesn't mean that we have to throw everything to the wind because of the conditions that we're in.
So as I listen to you, you're very passionate about that, and I'm absolutely just getting energized listening to your response, but what comes to me as I'm listening to you that I think is one of the things that we have to re-energize ourselves around is that sense of community, of us coming together like it was back in the day. And I know people that are not of the back in the day era get tired of us folks who are from back in the day saying back in the day. When we walked 5 miles to school with no shoes and all, I know you get tired of hearing all of that. But there is a reality that I do believe that sense of community has been lost. So if there were a place of convergence, if you will, if there was this place of bringing it to center, that it feels like we're going to in this conversation, it's that we need to come together.
Absolutely.
More than we have. Somewhere along the line, I believe, tell me what your thoughts are on this, We've lost that sense of real community. I see it coming back in little spurts, but I'd love to see it come back like it was back in the day, like it used to be. And that then takes us back to that mentality of which you are so powerfully, is so powerfully ingrained in you. It don't matter what the system is. It doesn't matter what my situation is. At the end of the day, if we all come together, we're bigger than any situation that can be put against us.
And I'm not waiting for we to happen.
I hear you.
I'm committed to coming together with my people wherever we are and whenever it is. And so I'm just as happy with being around folks in the flea market as I am in the church and as I am in the neighborhoods. And my children that I see with their pants sagging and stuff, I'm not discouraged by that. That's just their clothes. I want to hear who they are, those young people, and the wisdom and the smarts that come out of them in spite of what they have on and how they're wearing.
Wow, that's beautiful. Can you believe that we've come to the end of our time? Oh,
well,
my
it
goodness.
always happens that way, so we have to do this again.
We have to do this again, and we will do this again. There's a story that is just pulling out of me from today. It's called Autobiography in 5 chapters. And this would be for those who are seeing themselves in a situation that they need to remove themselves from. I walked down the street, I fell in the hole, I didn't know the hole was there, okay, move on. I walked down that same street a couple of weeks later. I forgot the hole was there. I fall in again. I break my arm and my leg. A few months later, I see the street, and I go like, oh, I know that the hole is there, so I'm going to keep on going down it, and I won't fall in. I fall in, I break my arm, my leg, and my other arm. The next time I look at the street, and I go, wow, I'm going to go down a different street. So to whether you are a victim blamer or whether you are a system blamer, it's time for us all to look down another street. And I thank you so much for joining us. We're going to continue on with this series, Come Back. Welcome to come back and hear more about it. And as always, go out, make this a great day. Do something good for someone else.
Thank you.
Yeah.